I met Cindy Albee during the second semester of our freshman year at Florida State University. Cindy was pursuing a dual degree in education and business administration. I, on the other hand, was getting a degree in engineering. I wished my parents could show me a diploma with my name on it. Todd Anderson. I would be the first in my family to graduate from college. Cindy's dream was to become a school teacher and eventually move into an administrative job in education. She explained to me that she chose education because her parents were both teachers and then principals. Over the years, many of their former students had told Cindy how much they loved her parents, so she wanted to follow in their footsteps. The philosophy her parents instilled in her from a very young age was that people should strive to learn something new every day. I was in complete agreement with her parents' views on education because it wasn't too different from what my parents taught me. My parents owned a small farm and had 6 children. My mom and dad were always looking for ways to save a dollar. My dad instilled in me that it was better to learn how to solve problems yourself than to pay someone else to do it. Now I'm in college, not only learning as much as I can from my professors, but figuring out how to pay my tuition. Obviously, my parents didn't have the money to pay for my college tuition. I wanted to major in engineering because I had an aptitude for math and science, and it seemed like a natural path. To pay for my tuition, I got a job at a city tutoring service and worked about 20 hours a week. I still had to take out student loans, but the job minimized them. I had dreams of designing beautiful buildings. Eventually, I discarded that dream and pursued a new one. But more on that later. I first met Cindy when we were brought together as part of a group project in a political science class. I noticed her on the first day of class, but I didn't dare believe she would ever be interested in someone like me. She was beautiful, 5 feet 6 inches, a Rubensian figure, and long blonde hair. There was also something about her that made you want to like her. All the athletes and super cool guys flocked around her. Cindy dated a lot of them, but never seemed serious. About halfway through the semester, our political science professor informed us that he was splitting the class into 5 groups of 6 to work on a special project. I was incredulous at first. I had worked on group projects in high school, and it always seemed like there were 1 or 2 people in our group who weren't doing any work. But when Cindy was assigned to my group, my feelings changed 180 degrees. "Hi, I'm Cindy Brandon," she said to me, extending her hand. I, I'm, uh, Todd Anderson," I replied, stammering. "You don't seem very sure of that," Cindy laughed. I didn't want to look like a complete moron, so I quickly pulled out my wallet and looked at my driver's license. "No, no," I grinned. "I'm definitely Todd Anderson." I then showed her my license. She laughed out loud, and so began our relationship. In political science class, we had to take a famous Supreme Court case that the professor was assigning and break it down. We had to not only explain what the case was about, but we had to talk about the decision, discuss whether it was right, and defend that opinion. We were assigned Marbury v. Madison, which was the first major case in which the Supreme Court issued a decision that had far-reaching implications. This decision self-limited the power of the Supreme Court so that it could not become more powerful than the administrative or legislative branches of government. That decision made the Supreme Court what it is today. As it turned out, the other 4 members of our group were a bunch of slimeballs. 3 were members of the soccer team, and the 4th dropped out just before the end of the semester. Cindy and I had to research and write the entire report. I should have been annoyed that the rest of our group had left us, but I was thrilled because I got to spend a lot of time with Cindy. We got along so well that we started dating and then became exclusive. When I was in high school or college, I didn't go out much because I never had a lot of money. But that didn't matter to Cindy. She enjoyed sitting and watching TV with me or going for a walk. Going on a picnic or to a museum was a big date for us. I was hopelessly in love with Cindy, and she seemed to be just as much in love with me. We were married right after graduation. For the first 5 years of our marriage, life was mostly wonderful. Our new home was small, but it had everything we wanted. Since our house was in a new neighborhood, we soon made many friends, and our social life was a lot of fun. Cindy got a job teaching 8th grade at a middle school in northern Palm Beach County. I accepted a job with a major engineering firm in South Florida. However, over the years, I discovered that I did not enjoy engineering. As a junior engineer at the firm, I was getting all the crappy assignments. So to take my mind off the boredom at work, I enrolled in a master's program. I was sure that once I got my master's degree, my salary would increase and I would be assigned to more interesting projects. However, all I got was a $500 bonus. I was disappointed, but told myself, to hell with them, I would continue working and get my PhD. Other than the fact that my job was boring, I couldn't complain much about it. Cindy's work was going great, and we were very much in love. Financially, we were doing well, and we talked about having a baby. But, as the saying goes, all good things must come to an end. The first unwelcome news was when my boss informed me that I was being transferred from the design department to the inspection department. The few things I did in design were boring enough, but inspections were even worse. The second piece of news, which at the time I thought was good news, was that Cindy was moving to a new school, West Jupiter High School, to head up the guidance department. That promotion later turned out to be a disaster. The third hammer that fell on my life was the appointment of Brock Turner as principal of Cindy's school. He was a black former NFL player. Brock had played 5 seasons on 3 different teams. Dallas drafted him in the 3rd round as an inside linebacker, but traded him after 2 seasons, which was odd because he had 2 good seasons in Dallas. In Seattle, Brock again only lasted 2 years despite playing well. He was then traded to Philadelphia, where he had another good season, but his ankle was shattered in a playoff game. Philadelphia let him go, and because of the severity of the injury, his career was over. When Brock realized that his soccer career was over, he tried his hand at television because he was a very charismatic personality. Unfortunately, that charisma did not translate to the small screen. For some reason on television, his charisma looked like arrogance. He was quickly and quietly let go. He then took a job at a regional bank as a customer service associate. The bank was thrilled with him, but after about 9 months, Brock quit. He hated being stuck in an office, so he looked for something new to do. He eventually took a job as a physical education teacher and soccer coach at a high school in suburban Philadelphia. Brock stayed for 3 years and worked his way up from gym teacher to assistant principal and head coach of the soccer team. But the soccer team only did this way, and that way. In all 3 years that Brock coached the team, it won, but never made the postseason. When the principal at Cindy's high school retired, Brock applied for and got the job. That first year, I talked about Brock more than Cindy. After all, he was a former NFL player. I was in awe of him until I finally met him in person. He struck me as a self-centered narcissist. On the other hand, his wife, April, was charming, smart, and a little shy. She was also gorgeous. April reminded me of a smaller, but much prettier version of Whitney Houston. I couldn't understand what she found in Brock. Still, most of the school staff was enamored with him, including my wife. I tried to subtly hint to my wife that her boss was basically a woman hunter. Cindy only laughed and teased me that I was jealous. I decided to be honest. Yeah, I'm a little jealous. He's bigger than me, tougher than me, and was a professional soccer player. Cindy hugged me and said, "You never need to be jealous. He's only a couple inches taller than you, and as far as physical fitness goes, you're not a wimp. So what if he's a soccer player? I married you." She calmed me down and our life went on as usual. Even though I wasn't comfortable around Brock, my wife insisted on dragging me to all the school events where we always ended up with Principal Turner and his wife April. At these events, I was able to occasionally talk to her, and I learned that Brock and April had been married for 3 years and had a young daughter, Tiffany. It was at one of these events that I learned what a real asshole Brock Turner was. If Cindy thought I was jealous, I wouldn't hold a candle to Brock when it came to April either. The incident happened at a school district Christmas party. Brock asked my wife to dance without asking me. I found it disrespectful and was a little annoyed that Cindy didn't even look to see if I agreed. I watched Brock hold my wife at a respectful distance for a bit. I pulled myself closer to April so I could talk to her. Brock and Cindy stayed on the floor for 3 dances in a row, but I didn't notice it because I was having a great conversation with April. I learned that she was a part-time instructor at the local community college, which had just recently been converted to a 4-year college. She taught French and German. Her mother's parents had emigrated from the Congo to France, and her father was German. Shortly before April was born, her parents had emigrated to the United States. Since the college had only recently switched to a 4-year college, they were just about to fill their faculty vacancies. April hoped that her part-time job would lead to a full-time assistant professor position. As we talked, she showed me pictures of their daughter, who looked like a miniature version of April. I laughed as April told me one story after another about the many cute things Tiffany did. When the third song ended, Brock and my wife went back to the table. Brock wasn't happy that I was talking to his wife. "You're in my shoes!" he growled at me. I was taken aback by his behavior, but apologized and stood up. I then asked if I could get someone else a drink. April smiled and asked for another glass of Chardonnay. My wife asked for a Coke. As I headed back to the table, Brock grabbed my arm and snatched the wine glass out of my hands. Then he growled, "Stay away from my wife or I'll kick your ass." "What's your fucking problem, dude?" I asked, stunned by his behavior. "Just stay the fuck away from my wife," he said over his shoulder. A few minutes after the incident, Brock announced that he and April were leaving. His announcement was sudden and unexpected, and the look my wife gave me was also a shock. As we drove home, Cindy pounced on me. "What did you do to upset Brock?" "I didn't do a damn thing," I replied. "You must have done something because he got really upset with you," Cindy insisted. "He threatened to knock me on my ass if I didn't stay away from his wife. I was just being polite and keeping her company while you guys went off to dance without even asking me if it was okay to do so." "And what does that mean?" asked Cindy. "Screw it. This conversation is over," I said through clenched teeth. "I don't want to hear another word about Brock fucking Turner." After the Christmas party, my dislike of Brock had grown to a complete dislike. But I didn't want to rock the boat after all. He was Cindy's boss. Fortunately, after the Christmas incident, Cindy hardly ever brought up Brock. About 3 months after New Year's Eve, the economy went south. The commercial and residential real estate markets were particularly hard hit. At first, it had no effect on the company I worked for because we had a lot of work to do. After a few weeks, however, everyone started to get nervous because there were no new orders coming in, so I just kept my head down and kept working. But I knew that if the economy didn't pick up, the company would eventually start laying people off. One day, Cindy came home all excited because she had been assigned to organize a career assembly at school. I couldn't understand why she was so excited, since the only thing that would get the students excited was getting them out of class for 2 or 3 periods. But Cindy was thrilled to have been chosen to organize this event, and I gave her my full support. If I had known she was so thrilled that Brock had chosen her, I wouldn't have lifted a finger. But as it turned out, it was a good thing I helped. She had already made arrangements with an accountant, a lawyer, a nurse, a computer programmer, and other professions. Cindy wanted to know if I could get an engineer from the firm where I worked to give a short presentation. I approached my supervisor the next day, and he passed the question up the chain of command. In response, I was told that if I wanted to take a personal day, I could go. Since it was a matter of helping my wife, I agreed. The school assembly was to last 2 hours, and 12 different professionals were given 10 minutes each to talk about their chosen field. However, when Career Day came around, 4 of the professionals either canceled the assembly or didn't show up at all. Cindy was furious and on the verge of tears. I told her not to worry because I would be replacing the accountant, lawyer, auto mechanic, and doctor. When it was my turn, I kissed Cindy and told her not to worry. As I walked up the stairs to the stage, I saw a crowd of high school students bored to tears. The only reason they hadn't left by this point was because they would have to go back to class. As my slides were being loaded into the audio-visual equipment, I began my presentation. Good afternoon. I ask all those who are asleep to raise their hands. Sure enough, almost all hands went up, and the assembled students laughed. I knew I had gotten their attention. I hope what I'm about to share with you will be of interest. And if it isn't, at least my talk won't distract you from class for a couple more classes. The students applauded. Taking a big breath, I began. I'm an engineer, but I'm going to talk about 4 or 5 different professions. I'll also give you some actionable tips on how to succeed in anything you encounter, including how to finish high school with as little stress as possible. Upon hearing this, many students laughed, but sat up straighter. I was really getting up to speed. I started by telling them an anecdote about engineers. You all probably think engineers are just a bunch of nerds, but that's not true. Let me tell you a story about how practical engineers are. I then proceeded to tell my story. One afternoon, an engineering student was riding across campus on a shiny new bicycle. He ran into a friend, also an engineer, who said, "Wow, that's a great bike. Where did you get it?" "Well, the worst thing happened," said the first engineering student. "A girl rode up to me, got off her bike, threw off all her clothes, and told me I could have anything I wanted." "Wow," remarked the second engineering student. "That's great. That's a great choice. Her clothes probably wouldn't have fit you anyway." I then added, "Like I said, engineers are very practical." This elicited a roar of laughter. I then went into a slide presentation, showing all sorts of buildings and structures. I showed a carpet museum where the roof looked like a rolled-up carpet. Another building was called the Crooked House, which seemed to lean in several directions at once. Yet another building resembled a huge picnic basket. At the end of the slides, I showed a 9-story building with no name and asked if anyone could guess what was unique about it. After 5 or 6 shouted answers, I finally said, "You guys will never guess. What you're looking at is the largest brothel in Europe. It's 9 stories high and it's in Germany, in case you were wondering." This elicited cheers of approval from the boys and "yous" from the girls. I then went from one profession to another, explaining the average salary and the education required for each profession. I sprinkled the speech with jokes and advice on how to study and how to pass tests. I then relayed my long-held belief that if you want to succeed at anything, you should constantly strive to do better than you can. I explained that this sounds counterintuitive, but the truth is that if you don't strive to do better than you can, how can you ever get better? I also told the students that there is no such thing as a dumb question, and that it is never dumb to ask for help. The only people who are dumb are those who don't ask questions or ask for help. I talked a little bit about those who don't want to go to college but would rather work in their major. I explained that if they are interested in going in that direction, they should go for it. They will probably make more money than most people who graduate from college. I was having fun and didn't notice that I had exceeded my allotted time until Cindy gave me a frantic sign to finish. Nodding to my wife, I finished my speech with one last piece of advice. As you go through life, each of you will have to make a public speech sooner or later. It is one of the biggest fears people have. According to some surveys, the fear of speaking ranks higher than the fear of dying. Yet the time when you will have to give a public speech will come for almost every one of you. When that time comes, just remember to stand up to your full height so everyone can see you. Speak firmly so that everyone can hear you. Then make your speech as short as possible and sit down quickly so everyone can appreciate you. Thank you. You guys were great. I got a standing ovation, my wife kissed me, and Brock patted my hand. But it didn't end there. Unbeknownst to me, 3 principals from other schools were at the event, and they pounced on me to ask me to speak at their schools. I explained that I had to take a personal day to speak, and I did it to help my wife. However, Cindy still convinced me to take the time and give a speech at 3 other schools. All 3 speeches went very, very well. Moreover, at the end of my last speech at a high school in a poor neighborhood, the principal told me that he would like to have me as a teacher. I was on a high in those days, but as I learned, The good times ended and bad times began to come my way. One Monday morning, I was called into my supervisor's office and informed that I was being made redundant. The severance pay was fair. I received 3 months' salary, which included paying for my health insurance. When I got home and explained that I was being downsized, the first thing Cindy said was, "Oh, great. How are we going to pay the mortgage now?" I just looked at her and said, "Thanks for the encouragement." Then I grabbed a beer from the fridge and headed to our den. Cindy and I used it as an office. I turned on the computer and started looking for a new job. A few minutes later, Cindy very timidly walked in and apologized. She was just scared that we might lose our house. I kissed my wife and hugged her tightly. "Don't worry, the company has given me 3 months severance pay. I'm sure I'll find something before then." But while my severance was running out, I still hadn't found a job, and Cindy was getting more and more insistent that I find one. The tension in our family grew each day as I received one rejection after another. I began to feel more and more like a failure, and then something happened that made me feel even worse. Alan Latter, a vice principal at West Jupiter High School, was offered a job in California, and he accepted. He left 2 weeks later. Brock immediately appointed Cindy to take his place. Since then, I have had to hear about how all the students love Mr. Turner. The teachers think Brock is wonderful, and how he is being considered for the deputy superintendent position. My dislike for Brock Turner reached new heights. As my unemployment status continued into its 4th month, I couldn't escape the feeling that my wife was losing respect for me. But an opportunity I wasn't looking for presented itself. On the evening news, the newscaster read a report about a new program to bring teachers to schools in low-income areas. At first, the program relied on a candidate's life experience instead of a teaching certificate. However, if someone was hired, they had to be certified within 2 years. The starting salary was $3,000 more than the normal starting salary for a beginning teacher. Since I had been unsuccessful in finding a job in my specialty, I decided to give it a try. The next morning, I faxed my resume to the school board, and by noon, I had an interview scheduled for the next day. I didn't tell Cindy about it because I didn't want to get her hopes up. The interview turned into a job offer. I didn't know it at the time, but as soon as my resume appeared on the HR computer screen, a quick search was done on my name. Then, they found a videotape of one of my career speeches, and the process of hiring me was set in motion. They offered me a job at the worst school in the district, Riviera High School, which was located in Riviera Beach. The name of the town suggests that this is a very upscale neighborhood, but trust me, it is not. This neighborhood has been depressed for decades. Worst of all, Riviera High School had the lowest performance of any high school in the county. They ranked last out of 58 high schools, and only 6% of students were college-ready after their senior year. Anyway, I was offered a job teaching math and science. I accepted. When Cindy got home that evening, I excitedly told her about my new job. I expected her to be excited and supportive. Instead, she looked at me in horror and told me that she didn't want me to take the job because it was too dangerous. Then, Cindy started telling me horror stories about the school. There were metal detectors at every entrance and guards roaming the hallways. Last year, 3 teachers were attacked and another was stabbed. Besides, Cindy had to remind me that I knew nothing about teaching. She didn't think I would last a week. And after talking to several other teachers and hearing more horror stories, I have to admit that I was very nervous when I arrived on the first day. The appearance of the school didn't help. The building was old and poorly maintained. Graffiti covered part of the front of the school, and even the walls inside were scrawled. Students ran through the hallways as if they owned them, and there were security guards in every hallway and near every restroom. And I had all sorts of thoughts about what I wanted to do, but I quickly decided that I would stay out of the way until I knew the situation. Instead of getting to the lesson plan, I played math and science games. The games were simple and fun, and without realizing it, the students were actually learning some of the things they needed to know for the tests they had to take at the end of the year. Principal Ben Carlson, who was in his first year at the school, was an uncompromising educator. And the fact that he was a 6'3", 240-pound black man who didn't take any crap from anyone made him the perfect choice for principal. The students quickly realized that challenging him would be a big mistake. He believed in strict discipline, and I agreed with him. I especially appreciated his policy of taking all gang members out of their classrooms and putting them in one classroom with alternating teachers and 3 guards. Any of the gang members who stepped out of line would receive 1 warning and then be expelled. By the 3rd week, the worst of the gang members were gone. They were either expelled or left on their own. I know this seems harsh, but there are students you can't help. My wife was wrong about my stamina, because I not only survived the first week, but by December I was chipping away at it. I reworked my lesson plans to include a whole new series of games, and the students loved it. Other teachers picked up on some of my ideas, and it seemed to work. By the end of the year, Riviera High School went from 58th to 51st in academic performance, and I was nominated for Teacher of the Year. I didn't win, but I was honored to even be nominated. But I was annoyed that Cindy was not impressed with my teaching efforts. She kept asking me when I would stop wasting my time and find another engineering job. I finally told Cindy that I wasn't going back to engineering because I enjoyed teaching. She was unhappy with my decision, but seemed to accept it. During Christmas break, I decided that I was going to pursue a PhD, which I was unable to get because of the economic downturn. I wasn't really interested in engineering, but I was fascinated by computers. So I decided to pursue a PhD in computer science. From my last conversation with April almost a year ago, I knew that she was pursuing a PhD in comparative studies at Florida Atlantic University. I looked into the PhD programs at FAU and decided to also attend FAU to pursue a PhD in computer engineering. I spent another year at Riviera Beach High School, where our academic scores went from 51 to 46. At that time, the school board approved Cindy as vice principal at West Jupiter High School. But that summer, everything changed. As our lives continued, I received some good news. Brock had been named deputy superintendent, and Cindy had been nominated as the new principal of West Jupiter High School. I still didn't trust Brock as far as I could throw my house. However, I was glad that his new position meant that his office was now at the school district headquarters. Cindy didn't see Brock every day, Monday through Friday, but she still made the weekly trip to district headquarters. At first I was upset about this, but I learned that it was normal for new principals. I also continued to take classes at FAU, which was about 40 minutes away. Since April was getting her PhD at the same university, I offered to drive. April thought it was a great idea, but when she brought it up with Brock, he became furious. He immediately called me and threatened to kick my ass. I certainly expected him to drop the idea, but I didn't expect such hostility. Nevertheless, I was disappointed because I liked April and found her interesting to talk to. It would have made the trip more enjoyable. However, since the classes had the same break time, April and I usually had coffee together. Most of the time there were other people sitting with us, but sometimes it was just the two of us. At first we just made small talk, but as the months went by, we talked about everything. Despite Brock's jealousy, April and I became good friends. She even offered me a job at a newly established 4-year college. I thanked her for the offer, but explained that I was being considered for a head teacher position at a soon-to-open high school. During these meetings over coffee, I learned some things about April and Brock. I learned that April graduated with honors from Stanford, after which she returned to her parents' home in Philadelphia. She met Brock at a charity event and at first disliked him. But Brock was persistent, and eventually they began dating. Soon April fell deeply in love with him, and from the way Brock chased away any man who was too friendly with his wife, I could tell he was just crazy about her. About a year after they were married, Tiffany was born. Admittedly, April complained a bit that Brock didn't spend enough time with his daughter and had no patience for her. He wanted a son. "You've got to be kidding me," I laughed. "Your daughter is just an angel. If Cindy and I have a girl, I hope she'll be just like Tiffany. Thank you, April said, and kissed my cheek. One night during class, our teacher felt sick and had to leave. I could have left about 20 minutes earlier, but I decided to stay and have coffee with April. I was already in the cafeteria when April came in with a few of her classmates. I picked up the cup of coffee I had already bought for her, and she headed over to where I was sitting while her classmates went to get something for themselves. You didn't have to do that, Jacob, she said, smiling. No problem, I smiled back. I was here for about 15 minutes or so. When I came back for my second cup, I realized that your class was going to have recess in a couple of minutes. So it's not really a problem. Your class left early, asked April, taking a sip of her coffee. Yeah, the teacher got sick. April was quiet for a few minutes, then said, I envy you, Jacob. I should be further along, but Brock didn't make it easy for me. Now he's pressuring me to have another baby in hopes that I'll have a boy. But if I do, it will set my efforts to get my doctorate back years. I would have no chance of getting an assistant professor position. So I told him I wouldn't have a baby until I got my doctorate. He wasn't happy about it. April pulled her cell phone out of her purse and said quietly, Shit. Is there a problem? I asked. I need to tell Brock that I have to stay after my meeting with my counselor, but my phone is dead. Can I borrow yours? Sure, but do you think that's wise? April thought for a second, then nodded. You're right. There's no point in poking the bear. Amy, can I use your phone for a minute? April quickly dialed her husband's number, and I heard her utter her second damn of the night. Is there a problem again? I asked. Yes, April confirmed with desperation. I told Brock his mailbox was full 2 days ago, and he still hasn't released it. Say, could you do me a favor, Jacob? Sure, whatever you need. April opened her backpack and found a piece of paper in an envelope. She quickly wrote a note and sealed it in the envelope. Could you drop this note off at my house on your way out? Won't Brock be upset? Just tell him I tried to call him, but his damn mailbox is still full. So I caught you just as you were about to leave and asked you to drop off this note. I don't want him running in here because I'm an hour late. Although I wasn't thrilled about taking the note to Brock, I agreed. I reasoned that he couldn't be too upset. I was just passing along a message from his wife. But then, the old adage about killing the messenger rolled around in my head for a few minutes before I laughed at myself. As I turned onto Turner Street, my nervousness was replaced by confusion when I saw my wife's Volkswagen parked in Brock's driveway. I couldn't think of any reason why Cindy should be at Brock's house. And I parked on the street trying to figure out why my wife was at Brock Turner's house at this time of day. I tried to convince myself that Cindy must have a perfectly logical reason for being here, but nothing came to mind. I got a very uneasy feeling in my stomach and decided to look around the house. There were lights on downstairs, and most of the windows didn't have curtains drawn on them. I slowly made my way to the side of the house. I had never been to Brock's house, so I had no idea of its layout. The first window I peered through turned out to be the living room. The next room was the kitchen, and the third was the dining room. When I rounded the back of the house, I found that the curtains were mostly down in the fourth room. However, 2 of them were not down all the way, and one of the windows was not closed. What I saw shocked me. There was Brock and my wife cheating on me right in front of my eyes. At that moment, I had the good sense to pull out my phone and activate the video camera. I watched the whole thing like a paralyzed man. I stumbled back to my car and drove to the first parking lot. How could Cindy betray me like that? I screamed over and over. We talked about having kids, and now she's hoping her lover will get her pregnant. Now that the initial shock had passed, I was angrier than I had ever been in my life. There was no doubt in my mind that my marriage was over. The only question was how much pain I could inflict on both of them. I had the video, but I didn't think it would cause them anguish if they loved each other. And how I could get revenge, if at all, was not an option at the moment. But then, thoughts of revenge receded into the background when I remembered April. According to Brock, He was going to leave his wife with practically nothing. I should have warned her. I got back to FAU in record time. I raged all the way to the FAU campus. Even though I made it on time, I was afraid April had already left. I was relieved when I spotted her car with 24 others scattered around. April came out about 10 minutes later, and I got out of my car to meet her. She immediately saw how upset I was and became very alarmed. "Is something wrong?" she asked with deep concern. "Did something happen to Brock or Tiffany?" I shook my head. "As far as I know, physically both are fine. However, I have some very painful news to share with you. Your husband and my wife are having an affair." "That's not funny, Todd," April snapped back. "I know you don't like my husband, but I won't tolerate you making up lies about him." I wish it wasn't true, and I wouldn't believe it myself if I hadn't seen it and videotaped it. April dropped her textbook bag and purse. She started to shake. I gathered her things and said, "We need to talk. As much as it hurts you to see this, you need to know that I'm not making anything up." I walked her to the passenger seat of my car. Then I started the video and handed her my phone through the open door. April started sobbing uncontrollably before the video was even over. I took the phone from her and knelt down so I was at the level of her face. "I know this is all so sudden," I comforted her, "and you haven't had time to think about it all yet. But I've already decided that I'm going to divorce Cindy. From what Brock said in the video, it sounds like he plans to hide his assets before he divorces you." "I didn't hear that." April's face showed confusion. So I rewatched the video. Seeing it a second time, April was no longer shocked. She was furious. "I've heard rumors about Brock before and during our marriage, but I didn't believe any of them. But if he thinks he's going to run off with your whore wife and leave me to my fate, then he has something else entirely in mind." April then realized what she had said and apologized. "I'm sorry I made that comment about your wife." "Hey, you just called a spade a spade." After making sure April didn't mind going home and sending her a copy of Cindy and her husband, I headed home myself. By the time I got home, Cindy was asleep or pretending to be. I didn't really care. I went to our den, turned on my computer, and started planning the end of my marriage. The next day, when Cindy left around 8:30 a.m., I had already showered and was ready to tackle our finances. Before heading out, I found a divorce attorney online and made an appointment for the next day. Cindy and I didn't have a lot of assets. Our house had very little equity in it, so I figured it would be sold or Cindy could buy me out. We had joint checking, savings, and investment accounts totaling about $75,000. Cindy had a retirement account with the Florida retirement system, and I had a 401k account until recently when I joined the FedEx. Our two retirement accounts were about equal. As it seemed to me, dividing our assets would be easy, but I would have to wait until I talked to an attorney to find out what my situation really was. I already knew Florida was a no-fault state, so my video wouldn't help, but it might convince Cindy to sign the divorce if she wanted to fight. By 10 a.m., I had packed up what I could and got busy looking for a small apartment. I found a studio apartment in Lake Park and rented it. I then returned home and started packing my things. By about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I realized that the new apartment wouldn't hold all my stuff, so I found a storage unit near the apartment and rented it. If Cindy noticed my stuff missing, she didn't say anything. I stayed in my room, preparing myself for the possible new job I might be offered. I slept on the couch and Cindy would leave before I got up. The next day, I met with a divorce attorney, Alicia Smithson. She was a middle-aged woman who did not tolerate objections. After I explained what my wife was doing and showed her the video, she explained that the video would not be helpful in a divorce. She also cautioned me against posting the video on the internet, saying that I could be blamed if I did so. That evening, I waited for Cindy to get home so I could have a conversation with her. She burst in around 9 o'clock and rushed past me sitting in the living room. "Cindy, I need to talk to you," I called out to her. "I'm tired and I want to take a shower," Cindy said as she walked up the stairs. "I want to talk to you right now," I shouted. This caused Cindy to freeze at the foot of the stairs. She turned and demanded, "What the hell are you talking about?" "Come here and I'll tell you," I said, standing up. Cindy moved cautiously into the living room. "I think you owe me an apology for the way you just talked to me." "I guess not," I said, as I opened my laptop and started up the video. Cindy watched the video for only a few seconds before closing the lid. "I guess now that you found out about us, I don't have to try to hide it anymore," Cindy said, without any remorse. I chuckled. "Cindy, remember when you told me that people have to learn something every day?" "Yeah, so what?" she snapped back. "Well, apparently you didn't learn when I tried to warn you that Brock is a wimp. Now he's made you his whore." "There's no need to be so blunt," Cindy said with anger in her voice. "I know it must hurt your male ego, but a better man took me away from you. I was hoping we'd part as friends." I laughed out loud. "Since you refuse to find out the truth, you're left alone. I've already rented an apartment and moved some of my things there. I'll be back for the rest. You can stay in this house until the divorce. Then it will either be sold or you can buy it back from me. You'll be served with a summons at work on Friday." I left and settled into my new little hole in the wall. When you love someone as much as I loved Cindy, it hurts like hell. The first couple days I could barely drag myself out of bed to go to the bathroom or find something to eat. Luckily, it was summer, and I didn't have to go anywhere or do anything. All my thoughts were occupied with how to get back at the two of them, but nothing came to mind. On the third day, I forced myself out of bed, took a shower, and went grocery shopping. When I returned, I turned on the small television in the kitchen. One of those programs about celebrity scandals was on. It immediately caught my attention. Former NFL halfback Brock Turner and his wife are divorcing after 3 years of marriage. Rumors that Brock is a womanizer turned out to be true. His wife, April, filed for divorce, citing adultery as the reason. Our reporter met with Mr. Turner today. "Mr. Turner, is it true that your wife caught you with another woman?" "Please," Brock smiled sadly. "My wife and I are going through some bad times. We are overcoming a terrible misunderstanding. We would appreciate some privacy while we work to make our marriage stronger than ever." I didn't feel much satisfaction. I hadn't spoken to April since I'd first learned about what her husband was doing with my wife. Somehow it seemed terribly unfair that he'd ruined my marriage, and for all I knew, he and April were just patching each other up. Anger and sadness filled me again. But when the phone rang, fear stepped in. I didn't even get a chance to say hello before it started. "Listen, bastard, I know you're the one who took those pictures of me with my whore wife. Just so you know, I'm living in your house and entertaining her. And be sure to watch the 6 o'clock news tonight because your ass is grass." I was shocked that Brock had called me. But in the few seconds I pondered it, I realized it didn't take a rocket scientist to guess that I'd made the video. Even though the man was intimidating, I wasn't about to let him know I was intimidated. "Well, you're in luck, because Cindy will soon be my ex-wife," I said, with more bravado than I felt. "Besides, if you live there, I guess you didn't get to clear up that horrible misunderstanding." "Just watch the 6 o'clock news, you bastard! You won't be so smug afterward." He hung up after that. I pondered what Brock might do to me and turned on the local news at 6. But I didn't learn of Brock's threat until about 10 minutes after the broadcast began. Then the anchor announced, "Palm Beach County Superintendent of Schools. Standish Crawford resigned today to take a position with the Department of Education in Washington. Brock Turner, Deputy Superintendent, has been named Interim Superintendent. However, it is widely believed that the position will be offered to him on a permanent basis." A cold fear gripped me. Now I understood what Brock meant when he said my ass was grass. Since he was the superintendent and I was the teacher, he was my boss. Brock could make my life miserable or worse, set me up to take the blame for some scandal he caused. I had to get out from under his power. At first, I considered quitting and trying to find work in engineering again. But the economy was just starting to improve, and I needed income to live on and pay my divorce attorney. Cindy's lawyer made ridiculous demands. They demanded that I buy out half of Cindy's house for $50,000. If there was $20,000 in the house, that would be a great deal, and I would be entitled to half that amount. She also demanded that I give up adultery as a reason. Cindy also claimed I was hiding money and demanded that I pay a forensic accountant to investigate our finances. But as ridiculous as her demands were, I had to pay Alicia for my defense. Panic gripped me when I remembered that April had told me that the college where she worked was still looking for adjunct faculty. So I immediately called the college's HR department and inquired. They directed me to their website to fill out an online application. After reviewing my qualifications, I was hired to teach algebra, pre-calculus, and calculus. I was given a one-year contract that paid me about 80% of what I earned as a high school teacher. College teaching proved to be much more rewarding for me than high school teaching. In the high school where I taught, you were always trying to find new ways to get students interested. In college, most students really wanted to learn. And if I could make it interesting, they were excited. I had already been teaching for 2 weeks when I ran into April in the cafeteria. She seemed as happy to see me as I was to see her. We had lunch together and learned about each other's lives. April told me that Brock was fighting for a divorce and was dragging things out. He's even filed for sole custody of Tiffany. But a video of him having fun with my wife convinced the judge that he wasn't fit for primary custody. Nevertheless, according to April, the divorce took forever. I explained that my divorce has taken longer than I expected, but it seems to be finally coming to an end. I still can't believe I bought into all of Brock's bullshit, April said, pushing her unfinished sandwich away from her. I've heard the rumors, but Brock has a way of making everything he says seem believable. He must be one hell of a conversationalist to talk my wife into entertaining him, I said sadly. Cindy always told me that people should learn something new every day. However, I could have done without that lesson. I'm so sorry this happened to you, Todd, April said, taking my hand. You're one of the nicest people I've ever met. From that first lunch together, April and I started having lunch almost every day and often had coffee after lunch. This led to dinners out and other dates. I was falling in love with April, but I didn't want to risk ruining our friendship. Still, I wanted more, so when the circus came to town, I decided to take a chance. There's going to be a circus in town this weekend, I said over lunch one day. I was going to take Tiffany, but she might not be up for it, April said sadly. She still doesn't understand why Daddy doesn't want to see her. He told me that if I went ahead with the divorce, he would pay child support, but he wouldn't have anything to do with Tiffany. I hope you don't take offense, but Brock is a Class A, #1 asshole, I said with venom, but then smiled. But if you want to go, I'm sure the two of us can talk a 4-year-old into it. The day at the circus was a huge success. Not only was it a circus, but it was also a small fair. By the end of the day, April was holding one of my hands and Tiffany had a firm grip on the other. And with her free hand, Tiffany held the stuffed unicorn I had won tightly to her chest. When we got to their house, I walked them to the door and tried to kiss April on the cheek, but she pulled me to her and kissed me on the lips. I wrapped my arms around her and kissed her back. When we pulled away from each other, I felt Tiffany tug on my pants. I want a kiss too, Tiffany said, lifting her free hand to me. I picked her up and kissed her on each cheek. Thanks for letting me come with you and your mom. And thank you for being such a good girl today. Tiffany glowed at my praise, and I was about to put her down when April asked, Do you want to stay for dinner? No big deal. I was just going to make Tiffany's favorite dish, spaghettis. I love spaghettis, I said, pulling Tiffany closer to me. And I'd love to have dinner with you lovely ladies. Tiffany was quite successful at keeping the tomato sauce on her face and hands. I giggled every time she sucked another bite of spaghetti into her mouth. After her bath, Tiffany asked me if I would read her a story, and I readily agreed. I actually read 2 stories to her, using different voices for all the characters. Tiffany loved it, but wouldn't go to bed until I gave her a goodnight kiss. After Tiffany fell asleep, April and I sat on the couch sipping wine and talking about teaching. Suddenly, after setting down her glass, April picked up mine and set it back down. Then what happened happened, and we got down to it. After that night, we became very close, but we decided we weren't going to live together. At least we wouldn't live together until both of our divorces were final. Mine was finalized first, and I was relieved when the final court date came. I was in the courtroom when Cindy walked in there, arm in arm with Brock. Cindy smiled indulgently at me, holding Brock's hand tightly. He, on the other hand, smirked the whole time, especially after he kissed her before taking his seat. I convinced April to stay away because I was sure Brock would be there. The judge simply asked both lawyers if they were okay with everything. When they both agreed, he banged the gavel and I was divorced. April's divorce took almost 3 more months before it became final. But in that time, April and I both earned our doctorates. Shortly thereafter, April was promoted to associate professor. I, on the other hand, was not offered a faculty position, but was offered a 2-year teaching contract when the college had never before offered anyone more than a 1-year contract. Of course, this was the result of my classes being so popular that there was now a waiting list for each of them. I also agreed to teach an additional pre-calculus course because there were more than enough students on the waiting list to fill the new class. I was now earning about 25%, more than I had as a high school teacher, and I was promised an assistant professor position in the near future. And things were going better than I had any right to expect. But April and I reached a critical point in April when I had to go to a 3-day seminar in Atlanta. The sessions were all day with 5-minute breaks every hour or so. In the evenings, there were group sessions that usually ran late into the night. After finishing each day, I would fall into bed and start all over again the next day. I explained the schedule to April, and she understood. However, Tiffany didn't understand where I disappeared to or why I didn't call. When I finally returned, Tiffany practically jumped on me when I walked in. She was crying because I had left her. I tried to explain to her where I was, but Tiffany wouldn't calm down until I gave her a pink stuffed dragon. One of her favorite books was Rainbow Dragons, and her favorite dragon in the story was the pink one, who, oddly enough, was named Pinky. When I gave her the dragon, she squealed with happiness and covered my entire face with kisses. Finally, when Tiffany had calmed down, we sat down to dinner. The funniest things come out of the mouths of 4-year-olds. Tiffany turned to me and asked, "Why don't you live here? I want you to be my daddy." "Well," I said, looking at a grinning April, "I'd love to be your daddy, but I don't know what your mom would say to that." April, who was glowering, spoke up. "Her mom would say she'd be thrilled if you became Tiffany's dad, but there's a catch. You have to become my husband first." "Really? You're going to marry me?" I asked in shock. "I thought you'd never ask," April giggled. We were married in a simple service with just a few friends, my dad and April's mom. My mom died when I was 9, and April's dad died when she was 15. I was happy beyond belief. I know Cindy left me to switch, but I really felt like I had the upper hand. Sure, Cindy was living with a former NFL player, but I was now married to the most beautiful woman I'd ever known, and she had a precious little daughter whom I loved like my own. Throughout the divorce proceedings, Brock never stopped pursuing April. It was clear he was desperate to get her back. He went from pleading to veiled threats, yet he never did anything the police could accuse him of. He was still living with Cindy, and from what I heard, she was over the moon. I almost felt sorry for her, because eventually her lover was going to have to show himself in all his glory. When Cindy betrayed me, I was devastated and filled with rage. I wanted revenge on both of them so badly that I could hardly think about anything else. However, as I began to bond with April, the feelings of rage faded and the need for revenge evaporated. But as fate would have it, I was destined for revenge. Shortly after we got married, April and I decided to sell her house and buy a new one closer to college. We decided to try to sell it ourselves, and we were lucky. We were under contract within a few days. However, since Brock's name was still on the contract, he had to sign the contract. April called her ex-husband, and at first he was thrilled that she was calling him. But Brock's mood turned from joyful to unpleasant in the blink of an eye. When April explained that she wanted to sell the house to move closer to college, he told her that he wouldn't sign the contract. He was just being his usual asshole self. But April was prepared for his response and told Brock that if he didn't want to sell the house, then according to their divorce proceedings, he had to buy her out. This infuriated him, and he hung up the phone. However, the next day he called and agreed to sign the contract. At the closing of the deal, April asked Brock if he needed anything from the house. He replied that he didn't need anything and that it would be her problem to get the crap out. Cleaning out the house turned out to be a huge task. We left the basement to the very end, and that's when I found the pure gold. April brought a box full of junk, but at the very bottom was an old laptop that belonged to Brock. April explained that he'd bought a new laptop about a year and a half after he'd become principal of West Jupiter High School, and she figured he'd gotten rid of the old. 1. April asked if I could fix that computer so Tiffany could use it. I told her that shouldn't be a problem if it still worked. That night, after charging the battery, I was surprised to find that not only did the computer work, but it was still full of files. At first, I was going to just reformat the laptop, but then I decided I'd better go through all the files, in case there were some that April wanted to keep among them. Mostly I was thinking of pictures of Tiffany and April. What I found, however, took Brock from being a regular dumbass to a world-class dumbass. Yes, there were a few pictures and videos of April and Tiffany, but there were more women. Under each video or photo was a brief description of how he rated each woman. Most of the women I didn't recognize, but 5 I did. One of them was the wife of the Dallas quarterback. I recognized her because she was a world-famous model. I remembered that shortly after the date of their entertainment, the couple broke up. Shortly afterward, Brock had been traded. Now I knew why. The other 4 women were teachers at West Jupiter High School, and 2 of them were married. Yes, Cindy was one of the married teachers. And what was interesting was that Brock was tutoring them all at about the same time. There were half a dozen pictures and 2 videos of my ex-wife. The new videos were even worse than the one I had taken. I couldn't understand how my loving wife had turned into such a slut. But what he wrote about Cindy made me laugh. He praised her skills. However, he thought she was too clingy because she kept pestering him with requests to get her pregnant. He was thinking of breeding her, just to spite her husband. I was going to just delete the files, but then I thought this was my chance to get a little revenge. So I downloaded all of his women onto a flash drive and proceeded to go through the computer. What I found elevated Brock to the rank of the biggest dumbass in the universe. He left all his financial records behind. I couldn't believe it. Brock left a full financial statement with all his accounts, account numbers, and passwords. He didn't tell the truth about all his assets during the divorce. He had accounts in the Cayman Islands and California that were not listed on the list of assets submitted to the court. After going through the rest of the folders, I called April over. First, I showed her pictures of the women her ex-husband had slept with, and then his financial statement. I don't know what pissed her off more, the women or the money. In the end, I think it was the women. I found out that Brock slept with her maid of honor and all of her girlfriends. He also slept with her cousin. After that, things went downhill. April took Brock to court again for hiding marital assets. He could have gone to jail, but instead, the judge awarded April 65% of the hidden assets. A large portion of the money received went to a college fund for Tiffany. Another portion went toward a down payment on a house 2 blocks from the college campus. After the divorce, I continued to live in a tiny apartment, so my expenses were minimal. What I was able to save, plus what I got from the divorce, allowed me to equal April's down payment. I hadn't decided what I was going to do with Brock's top 10 entertainment choices, but I carried the flash drive in my pocket until I did. And it would still be there if it weren't for what happened at the college fair at the convention center in West Palm Beach. I was asked to be one of the speakers, and April canceled her classes to go with me. There were about 40 colleges, large and small, that had booths at the fair. High school students from all the surrounding schools were bussed in to talk to representatives from colleges and universities. Then there were several seminars on how to put together a winning college application, how to choose a major, and how to study and succeed in college. I was sitting with our college representative when I heard the voice of the person I despised the most, Brock Turner. "Look over here, Cindy," Brock said with a smirk on his face. "That's your loser ex-husband." "That's funny, Brock," I said with a fake smile, "because that's exactly what your ex-wife says about you." "You're such an asshole, Todd," Brock said as his face turned red. "Meh. I've had the thought of teaching you to ignore your proteges." "Just ignore him, Brock," Cindy said as she took his hand. "He's not half the man you are. Don't stoop to his level." Brock looked at Cindy and then at me with a nasty smile. Then he reached down and kissed Cindy on the lips. She melted into his embrace. When they parted, Brock smirked at me. That made me make a decision. As they turned to leave, I turned to Cindy. "Cindy, I found these pictures of you on the computer. I thought you must have them. You always told me that people should learn something new every day." She took the flash drive, muttering a "thank you." Unbeknownst to her, April had witnessed the exchange and at that moment came over to me. She hugged me and kissed me on the lips. "I'm sorry I've been gone so long, honey." "What the hell?" Brock said, with a stunned expression on his face. Then his face turned bright red when he saw April's pregnant belly. "Oh, hi, Brock," she said sweetly. "Are you catching up with my husband?" Brock took a step in my direction, but changed his mind as one of the guards walked by. He continued walking with Cindy, but looked back 2 or 3 times. He looked worried. That night, April and I lay in bed while I applied lotion to her stomach. We were only slightly paying attention to the newscaster until he started a new story. The police were called to Inspector Brock Turner's house this evening. We don't have any details at this time, but it appears that Mr. Turner suffered a non-life-threatening stab wound. All we know at this point is that the superintendent is in the hospital and the woman, Cindy Albee, has been placed in the county jail. I looked at April and said with a smile, "I guess Cindy learned something new today." The end. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.